Well, I'm Mike. I'm going to be acting as the chairman. I work in business and have commissioned this survey. I'd like the individuals along the panel to introduce themselves.
Hi, I'm Colin. I'm responsible for education and training within the community and engagement, public engagement.
I'm Alex. I represent employers.
Hi, I'm Shanna. I am interested in what you do and looking for a way into your career.
I'm Sophie. I'm a first year. I'm also interested in what you do and trying to get into your career.
For the purpose of today, I'm not on the panel. I'm just going to take notes for the panel.
Okay. Start again. Welcome.
Thank you.
Welcome to our Pelagic Survey presentation 2012, and we are presenting this to you as a consultancy, which is Kernow Oceanographic Development, or COD for short. We have been asked to create a consultancy that uses pelagic survey techniques to identify populations in the marine environment. Each individual survey aimed to look at a different trophic level in the ocean, which we then interlinked at the end, giving us a better understanding of the health and welfare and the dynamics of populations in the seas surrounding Cornwall and the Isles of Scilly. Our aim was to present the first years with the pelagic surveying techniques. Our objectives were to plan a single pelagic survey, to then train and develop a delivery team, and then to present our survey to the first years. Okay, if you could save your questions till the end, we'd like you to pose them to us as a consultancy. Okay, and if you can have no eating and drinking in the labs as well. We're now going to pass you over to the boat survey team.
Well, good afternoon, welcome. We are the boat survey team. My name is Matt.
Mike, James,
Claire.
and Alex.
Okay, so we decided to take the first survey on the Monday. Okay, we were on a boat survey, and what we were looking at was below the trophic levels actually, so what affects the primary producers within the trophic levels. So we were looking at inorganic influences. It's important that the primary production relies heavily on a balance of these factors. So we were looking at temperature, salinity, dissolved oxygen, pH and turbidity of the water. We were investigating the chemical and physical influences on primary production within an estuarine environment, so we chose the Foul River estuary. We came up with a hypothesis that there is no significant difference in the chemical and physical properties which may affect primary production at 3 different locations within the Foul estuary system. These 3 locations were Black Rock at the mouth of the estuary, Myla a bit further down, and then Fiop just as the estuary goes a little bit thinner there.
And it's important to note as well, with our null hypotheses, it's actually something we're hoping to reject in this situation.
Okay, all samples were collected by using a Niskin bottle, and we took 2 samples, one metre from the surface and 1 metre from the bottom. We then tested dissolved oxygen by using a DO probe. The DO probe was simply put into the water sample and it supplied a figure. As you can see, Fiop had the lowest amounts of dissolved oxygen, next was Myla, and next was Black Rock. These results produced were expected because as Fiop is the furthest away from the estuary mouth, it's generally a lot more calmer, and diffusion rates in calm waters are really, really slow. And as you can see, there's a higher amount of dissolved oxygen at the upper surface at Fiop than there is at the bottom. This is greatly increased at each different location. Myla's the next, but Myla has a higher amount of dissolved oxygen at the bottom, and that's the same with Black Rock. These are produced because in more turbulent waters, dissolved oxygen diffuses quicker throughout the water column because of greater increased surface area because of waves, and this is why we've produced better dissolved oxygen readings throughout the water column. Also, there's because of the salt wedge that occurs in estuarine environments, salt wedges are where denser, saltier waters are then sink to the bottom, and then there's a layer of fresh water that sits on top. And this explains why we have a greater reading of dissolved oxygen at the lower surface than the upper surface, because the well-mixed oxygen from the sea is sitting on the bottom, and then that's covered by a small layer of less mixed fresh water.
The graph at the bottom right shows a comparison between the pH levels recorded at the three locations. We recorded from a lower level and an upper level. We used a Tetra Pak to onboard the boat to determine the pH levels of the samples that were collected previously from the Niskin bottle. To do this, we'd add the pH region to the sample and then match the colour up with the colour chart in the Tetra Pak. The graph shows that the pH is greater at the surface at Fiop and Myla, which is what you typically expect to find because the greatest carbon dioxide levels influence pH, and as it's at the surface, there's more diffusion of carbon dioxide. Black rock was different, and we think this is because of the salt wedge dynamic of the estuary, where surface water is being pushed to the bottom, so CO2 and high pH water is being pushed underneath.
I'd just like to pass you this folder. It's got all of our information in there and a copy of our full report as well. If you'd like to flick through that as well.
The graph from the top left shows the salinity and temperature readings from all three sites. Temperature is measured with a standard thermometer that we've just placed in the Niskin bottle sample, and salinity was measured with a refractometer, which you simply place some of the sample onto the lens and then the salinity reading can be read through the eyepiece. The graph shows that salinity decreases from Black Rock to Fiop, so up the estuary, and temperature increases from Black Rock to Fiop. This salinity reading is probably due to the salt wedge dynamic of the estuary again, and to freshwater runoff, which is more abundant further up the estuary you go. And temperature increases as further up the estuary it's more enclosed and there's less water moving around, whereas Black Rock, it's exposed to the sea, so there's more currents, waves, which influences the temperature.
Excellent. Thank you, James. Probably one of the arguably most important readings we did on the boat was probably via the SecuDisc. The reason I say that is because the SecuDisc is actually quantifies the transparency of the water, and obviously, as we all know, water trophic orders and prime producers need sunlight to photosynthesize. And SecuDisc can help us understand at what depth of the water column turbidity, in terms of how clear the water is affecting the prime production rate of an organism. So basically, the higher rate of turbidity, the more turbid the water is, the less light penetration can penetrate through the water. This is usually due to suspended particulate matter in the water, which is little bits of inorganic waste or excrement or products which stop light penetrating the depths of the water column, which gives us an idea on how far down the prime producers can produce. Basically, the results are as we expected, really. Milo and Fiop, being higher up in the estuary, are areas which are experiencing a lot of land runoff, which increases their suspended particulate matter, therefore increasing the turbidity, therefore being light penetration is less in these areas. And they are the same in these situations. And obviously, Fiop is higher up the estuary, whereas Milo is in the middle. Black Rock, on the other hand, we've got some random data. We're expecting turbidity levels to be a little bit higher in this area. A little bit less in this area, due to the mixing of the water in Black Rock. Also, the fact that Black Rock is quite close to the ocean, so it always receives a steady stream of natural seawater, which is not so much affected by suspended particulate matter, which you get from the land runoff. And so, as you can see by a graph here, we've got a reading of about 4.5 at Black Rock, which is quite a lot higher than what we're getting in Milo and Fiop. Obviously, you can probably notice here as well, we've got quite a low reading. This is because the boat was actually drifting in this location, and we're drifting on an area that was less mixed. Got more suspended particulate matter, possibly in the water column, closer to the land, into a deeper channel where a lot of the boats would come through, which is usually clearer water, which you'd get from the sea. Yeah, and basically, as I was just saying, the Black Rock has the deeper channel and lower turbidity level due to the positioning at the forefront of the estuary. In conclusion, we did some statistical analysis, which is actually in our report. Unfortunately, we didn't yet collect enough data to have enough evidence to reject our null hypotheses, which is what we're aiming to do. This is due to the fact that we didn't get enough information. It was done in one day rather than over a series of days, which would be important to get a better understanding. And more research would be needed to make a significant conclusion.
So to evaluate, we've included a comprehensive evaluation in the report, but the overall boat survey ran smoothly. We felt that the group learned a lot of new survey techniques, along with some techniques that they'd already been using to measure chemical and physical factors of the Val estuary. However, the main points that we felt impacted on our survey was the survey took place the day after a large storm, so this may have affected the results, particularly the turbidity that Alex was talking about. So we had poor weather conditions. This would need to be taken into account when analysing and talking about our conclusion, really. We chose 3 sites which were close together. This was due to time constraints because of boat hire and also the time constraints of the people available. So this meant that we produced similar results in 3 locations, whereas if you had chosen locations further apart, you may have had different results. We had a small snapshot sample really because we did a survey over 1 day. So ideally we would survey over a number of days or a number of weeks to provide more conclusive evidence. And we also found that we had equipment issues prior to the survey itself, so what we were going to use in terms of equipment actually became unavailable a couple of days before our actual survey took place. So we used different equipment to what we'd originally planned. And had we been able to use the original equipment, which was the CTD, then we would have had maybe more accurate results. We've included a method for the CTD in the appendices, but it's not in the main report.
Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Listening, we'll pass over to the plankton team.
Hi. My name's Bryony and this is Lauren. We're firstly going to give you our report, which is the complete report. So this is everything. So like the guys who skated to the boat, and then all of our data, everything that we've collected, the overall data is in the folder for you as well to have a look through. So we did a plankton survey. So we were looking at the abundance of the so in relation to the trophic levels, we were doing very basic trophic levels. So we were doing primary producers and primary consumers, which were the zooplankton and phytoplankton. We looked into climatic and non-climatic conditions and their effect on the abundance of these phyto and zooplankton within the Val estuary. And we also did water quality testing.
So what did we do? The evening before our survey, we went down to the Val estuary and we collected a large sample of plankton. These were then brought back to the lab and placed in 2 separate culturing systems. One was just kept as a control and the other was heated to a degree of 20 to try and imitate climate change. We then left the samples overnight and they were analysed using Sedgwick rafter cells and a random number generator in the lab with microscopes the next day. We then analysed our data using the Mann-Whitney test, but alongside of that we also tested the water quality. So we tested for dissolved oxygen, pH, salinity, phosphate and nitrate, and then these were analysed in pie charts and graphs, which you see later.
So we spoke to why did we do this? So why did we do this survey? So we spoke to a professional who was looking into the Val estuary, and we spoke to him in regards to plankton. So we've got quite a few quotes from him as well. But we wanted to have a look at climate change and the way that that affects the biological, chemical and ecological factors on plankton and their abundance within the Fowl Estuary. We focused on plankton abundance and their community structures, and we looked at the growth of plankton. The growth of plankton is limited when the availability of nutrients is lessened, so we kept a really heavy eye on them when we did the survey day within the culturing tanks.
However, we found that there was no significant difference in plankton abundance between the two tanks, but we do think this may be due to the plankton not acclimatising to our different temperatures, as they were only left overnight, whereas climate change is happening at a constant rate over a number of years. So to try and replicate that in a lab condition was quite difficult. We also found that water quality results, dissolved oxygen, pH and salinity remained fairly constant in both of the tanks. However, nitrate levels were a lot lower in the tank with increased temperature, which is not what we expected to see. We expected the reverse. But if we assume that plankton production was higher in the control tank, then we could assume that there was more waste being produced, which is in the form of nitrate, which would explain our results.
Thank you for listening, and we'll pass you over to the dissection team.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Erin Kettle and I'm part of the organising team for the dissection survey. If I could hand you our organising folder. It contains all the materials which we've produced, all the research, all the documentation, and also, if Johnny will bring it over, our website is available for you to view electronically. Thank you. The importance of dissection in biology training states that the learning that occurs in a dissection is qualitatively different from that which occurs in a paper and pencil setting. When students know that a specimen is real, their attention is heightened. What ensues is a tremendous explosion of consciousness and understanding. The technique of dissection has been used to understand the biological inner workings of organisms since the 5th century, and it remains a fundamental tool in the arsenal of scientists to this day. Our survey focuses on the local stock of Scomber scombrus. In a bid to assess the health stocks of the Atlantic mackerel, we collected samples from opposite areas of the Cornish coast. One sample collected from the north and one sample collected from the south. Our aim was to quantify any significant difference in the presence and number of anematode parasites in the gut and digestive tracts of these fish. Thank you. I'll now pass you over to Johnny, who will discuss the methodology with you.
Just to reiterate on what Erin said, our aim was to learn about dissection techniques and then apply it to actually dissecting a fish. So our null hypothesis was that there would be no significant difference between the number of nematodes or parasites found in the species of mackerel between the north and south coast. Just to run through the method then. We had 3 weeks that were allocated. The first week was a planning week. In this week we used our time to try and produce an informative and a better way of gathering all of our knowledge so that we could have a smooth week of teaching firstly our trainees who would be presenting the dissection and making sure that there would be no problems along the way. Then the second week was actually our training weeks, where we trained our presentation team. In this, we just made sure that they knew every part of it, that they were competent on how to deliver the dissection and whether they had any questions or not with us. So we liaised with them quite a bit to see what they thought was needed changing and that. Then lastly was the actual presentation date. On this day, the morning was split into 2 groups. The dissection plankton group went first. They had the morning, and then we took our first years in the afternoon. And then we basically just the presentation group presented the dissection. And then if we go on to the next slide. We also have a QR code which you can scan to get the video, and our first years and the presentation team had this at least a week in advance. Charlie's just going to show you now on her phone when she scans it.
I already
Yeah.
scanned it.
And
It's just loading.
Charlie will give you the
So
stats.
The video will come up. Thank you, Johnny. For this investigation, we are going to carry out the Man-Whitney statistical test on our results. This is to compare two different locations of counted data, for example, a population. As the number of nematodes is being counted, this makes this test the most appropriate statistical one to use. We plotted our results on a graph, as you can see here. This was to visually compare the results. As you can see, there is a significantly higher amount of parasite numbers from the north coast than there is from the south coast. From this data, you can draw up your own conclusions based on this. However, these conclusions would be unstatistical. After you've done your statistical analysis on your results, you can draw up conclusions which could possibly be slightly different to the ones that you can visually see. I'm now going to pass you over to Barney to discuss this.
Thank you, Charlie. My name's Barney. I'm going to talk you through some of the reasons for why we could have got these results. As you can see, it does look like there were more parasites found on the fish from the north coast than the south. In fact, in our study, 100% of the fish that we got from the north coast did have parasites in them, compared to only a quarter of the south coast. Now, parasites in fish may sound surprising, but most of the fish you've eaten in your life has probably had parasites in it. We as humans have got parasites living in us of all sorts. But we were just trying to sort of help quantify, see if there was something going on. And we got this one fish with over 200 parasites, and that was odd. That was more than we expected. But we looked at a couple of reasons for why there would be more on the north coast. First of all, the fish from the north were bigger, which implies that they were older, which you could conclude meant that they had more time to, become infected with parasites. And another reason that we looked at, which was put forward by the Sussex IFCA, the Inshore Fisheries and Conservation Authority, though it's still debated in the scientific community, is that fish from the area that we took them in the north of Cornwall tend to live a more sort of transient life. They travel around a lot more, live up and down the coasts. Now, if this were true, you could see why it would lead to a higher incidence of parasitism, because these fish, obviously, they're travelling greater distances, chances of running into a parasite and accidentally swallowing it a lot higher. But, unfortunately, because we had a small sample, the data is not statistically relevant. But I think, and our team feels, that it's opened the door for possibilities of new research, better research, that would return some valid and useful data. I'm going to pass you on to Antonia now, who's going to talk about some of the conclusions we can make.
Thank you. We have raw data in here, as you can see. We found from our statistical tests that our results are insufficient. So we have insufficient data to reject our null hypothesis, which, just as a reminder, was that there is no significant difference between the amount of parasites found on the north coast and the south coast. Now, this obviously isn't good. This isn't what we wanted scientifically, but we feel educationally our little survey went quite well. We feel that there was good media, there was lots of videos, there was a lot of data in there, good book going on, but obviously this isn't what we wanted ours. It was all about science. So we didn't feel this went too well, but we can concur that further research needs to be done before we can make any big conclusions. Pass you over to Nick.
Good afternoon, guys. I'm just going to talk to you briefly about our evaluation and just highlight a few of the main points. We felt that the training of the presentation group went really well. We tried to provide a number of different mediums, including a training video, a practical demonstration, a step-by-step guide with photos, as well as a full written methodology. So we hope that this would suit all learning types. The good training we feel was reflected both in the feedback we got from the tutor on the day and also in the professional and smooth way the dissection was carried out by the first years. One area we felt we could improve and would enable us to get more data was by measuring and weighing the organs from each fish. It's something we thought of in hindsight, as we realised in hindsight that we had enough time to do this. So for the future, it's something we'd look at doing. Unfortunately, our survey hit a bit of an issue with the fact that the number of first years declined from when we initially started planning to the actual day due to sickness and people leaving the course. So we were left with a total of 8 samples when we would have liked 10, and that's what we planned for. And having 10 would have given us a bit more of a scientific conclusion, would have enabled us to draw a bit more of a scientific conclusion than we actually ended up being able to. We'd like to repeat the test in the future, the survey in the future, and in doing this we'd give each student 1 fish. This would give us a bigger sample size and much more data to analyse. Finally, thanks very much for listening. I'm going to introduce you to the Megafauna survey group and look forward to answering the questions at the end.
Just like to give you our folder first. So I'd like to welcome you to our survey. We did the Selenian and we looked at megafauna and birds on the Selenian. And I'm Abby, Chloe, Steph and Emily. We conducted the survey due to knowing about what we wanted to see in the local oceans, the Cornish coast, how popular they are. We use the Selenian because it's a popular route that the orca people use, and we use orcas methods to do our survey.
Right, so our aims were to conduct a survey onto the megavertebrates population between Penzance and the Isles of Scilly aboard the Selonian boat. Our main objectives were to record the ID of the populations, to record the location with GPS and the activity in the sea, and to put our survey techniques into practice. The hypothesis was that there was no significant difference between the population and the species diversity between Penzance and St Mary's on the port side and the starboard side of the boat. And the equipment list, if you want to see it, is in the folder we just gave you.
So I'm just going to talk you through a couple of pieces of equipment that we use. So we use retinal binoculars for when we spotted the species to see how far away from the horizon they was to get an exact distance of where we spotted them. We also used orca's recording sheet, which is this, which we had to fill in each individual bit when it came up. It was really simple to use and it's industry standard. So I used angle boards, which is spotting how far along the boat you was. So you stood on the boat and you use the angle to see whether, from where you were stood, the angle where the species was spotted from.
Okay, so I'm just going to go through the method that we actually used very briefly. Obviously, we used Orca's method, so we had already a basis to start from. So we arrived onto the boat, and we put everyone into their groups. So we had first years and second years to help the first years out. And once out of the harbour, we had one team on the port and one team on the starboard. And in each of those groups, we had one recorder, one cetacean observer and one bird observer, and they would rotate every 15 minutes. So in total, there was 45 minutes of surveying plus an extra 5 minutes, so that it would carry out the whole journey. So we had starboard observer would scan 90 degrees, starboard, that was right, isn't it? No, starboard, 10 degrees to the port, and vice versa, so port 90 degrees up to 10 degrees starboard. And we basically used the retinal binoculars, the angle bores, also used distance of eye, which was a very hard judgment to make, to fill out the sighting sheet, which you've just seen and is also in the book. Also, we wanted them to record the weather and the sea state, because that obviously helps out on what actual cetaceans and what sightings you actually make. If it's choppy, you're not going to really see a lot. And basically, there were 6 groups, so there were 3 surveys, the whole journey carried out from harbour to harbour, and it was repeated on the way back.
Then it goes on to the results. Our results showed that on the way out and on the way back there were more gannets and more gull species seen, mostly on the port, which is mostly out to sea on the way there and towards land on the way back.
The next graph shows the marine vertebrate results. Unfortunately, due to weather, we didn't really get to see as much as we would like to have done. The blue shows the harbour porpoises. We saw about 3 in the entire journey. The red shows grey seals, and the green shows sunfish. These are our statistical analysis. We used chi-squared. These results show that because our test statistic was higher than our critical value, it shows that we can reject the null hypothesis. So there is a significant difference in the number of birds on the way out and the way back before Anne started. And the statistical analysis for our marine vertebrate species show that because our test statistic was lower than a critical value, that we didn't have enough evidence to reject the null hypothesis. So ideally, next time, we'd like to get more data.
Just to give you some reasons for this, the species that we're looking at are mostly pelagic, so you would find them further out to sea rather than to the coast. So on the way out, as you can see from our raw data, that our totals were higher on the port side because they were further out to sea rather than on the starboard side. And also on the way back, obviously the starboard side was out to sea, which may be the reason why there is a slightly higher total. But to conclude, as Steph said, that we rejected the null hypothesis for the bird survey, and there was insufficient data for the citations and fish.
Okay, the evaluation, the trip ran fairly smoothly, which is always good. We tried to motivate the groups by handing out warm drinks, biscuits, crisps, because obviously it's going to be cold and the weather wasn't very nice. We also took extra clothing in case the groups got cold, which is never good when you're trying to do a survey outside. The knowledge review was a success, so we gave them questionnaires before we started and after we carried out the survey, and it showed that there's quite a bit of a difference. They actually learned something, which is always good. Again, so the first years improved their knowledge. Visual aids were improved, so they knew more species after they'd finished our survey. Bad points were not all the recording sheets were filled out correctly. That is partly our fault. We should have been with the groups the whole time. Attention levels for the delivery team wavers slightly over the course of the day, partly because it's a very long day, weather wasn't that great, it's quite cold. So next time we try and motivate them a little bit more. We found that some of the second years took over from the first years, mainly because they knew more. Maybe they thought they're trying to help out, which is a nice thing, so we did try and step in a little bit. Our weather was affected. We were very lucky to see 3 harbour porpoises because normally you don't see them when the sea state is higher. The sea state was lower when we were going out of harbour, that's probably why we saw them. The organising group should have been observing the whole time. This goes back to the recording sheets. And for the first years, no previous knowledge for most of them was known about statistical analysis. But I think the second years did very well in explaining it all. And the first years did pretty well, I think, on the stats. So.
We'd like to pass you over to the Litter Peak team now. Thank you for listening.
Good afternoon, panel members. My name is Warren. I'm a member of the Beach Clean team of COD. I'd like to first start by handing to you our full survey report, in which you will find full details of our entire survey. Now, September 1st marked the beginning of International Beach Clean Month, in which committed members of the public attempt to conduct beach cleans every single day. 3 of our members of our team spent the summer working on a conservation program in Thailand, where one of our roles was to conduct 1, sometimes 2 beach cleans every day of that month. Now, this experience helped us with not only our methods, but to better understand the underlying issues at hand. Sorry. Marine litter plays the second largest anthropogenic impact on the oceans, second only to greenhouse gases. And our team felt a devotion to try and combat this problem, as well as a responsibility to try and better educate our first-year students on the footprint we are creating, but also how to solve the problems. Now, to conduct our survey, we conducted 2 beach cleans. One on Thomas Porth Beach on the island of St. Mary's in the Isles of Scilly, and the other at Sandwell Beach at the Royal Yacht Club in Falmouth, both with great results. We wanted to compare these results to determine whether there was a significant difference in the distribution of marine litter based on geographic location. I'll now pass you on to Stu, who'll tell you a bit more about marine litter.
Hey guys. I'd just like to give a humbling fact to start this off. When you put the history of the Earth into a timescale, you've got the Earth was formed 4.5 billion years ago. Life on Earth started 3.5 billion years ago. Dinosaurs were around 200 million years ago, and humans have been around for 200,000 years. And then you think about the Industrial Revolution has happened in 100 years, 110 years. And we've changed our ecosystem, we've changed the chemistry of our oceans, we've destroyed our atmosphere. And people are saying that the Earth goes through cycles and it's all part of what happens. Well, the water in the North Seas are as acidic as the dinosaurs' time. So it's taken 200 million years, and we've changed it back in 100 years. There's a lot of the definition of marine and the mineral. When you've got marine debris, a lot of it mineralizes, which also helps with carbon, or it doesn't help, but helps with carbon dioxide, ocean acidification. Mineralization is when compounds, the products that we produce, break down into carbon dioxide, water, and other inorganic molecules. And carbon dioxide helps to acidify the ocean. But most of the most common plastics we use, like polyethylene, which are plastic bags, polyamide, which is nylon, so it's used in ropes, fishing ropes, in your clothing. All of this ends up in the ocean. So those most common plastics don't mineralize, and they break down into smaller and smaller pieces until you get to the point where they're microscopic. You need a microscope to see them. Obviously, we can't solve this problem, so that's why we're doing the best we can. So people need to be more aware of what we're doing to the planet and try and reduce and reuse and recycle what we do in the valuable resources we possess at the moment. So the direct impacts from marine litter in the environment would be widely affect the Scombri and Scombrus, is that they'd ingest the food, and then take in plastic with it. And most of the plastics don't pass through the digestive tract. They get trapped in the intestines, which gives them a false sense of being full. So quite often they die of malnutrition because they think they're full and they're not. And then it also affects seabirds in the same way. Seabirds tend to eat bigger pieces of the litter, so it can puncture their gut and displace the food that they've actually eaten. There's a lot of discussion about how much litter we're actually putting into the ocean. To date, there's not actually any up-to-date fact on how much litter we're pumping into the ocean at the moment. The last survey was conducted in 1975 by the National Academy of Science, and this was before that dumping of plastics and things were illegal in the seas. Now it is illegal, but they measured 6.4 million metric tons of litter in the ocean per year. Obviously, it's going to change drastically since then. We've got more economically developed countries around the world, but then it is illegal, so having to measure illegal dumping, surface runoff from the streets, all these kinds of things would be very difficult. You've got the NOAA, which is the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Association, are working with other agencies to try and do some kind of measurement or estimation at the moment. For our survey, we were collecting for the MCS, which is the Marine Conservation Society, but Ben will tell you more about that.
Hi, yeah, we did our surveys at Sandwell Beach and Thomasport, like Warren said. The reason we chose these two beaches is because both beaches are in close proximity to a harbour. They're both protected from the south side by a natural or unnatural barrier. And yeah, that was it. Yeah, like Sue said, we did the MCS's, used the MCS's methodology in doing this. This is basically, as you can see on the board, this says 100 metre, but we actually did a 50 metre transect because of the size of the beaches we were comparing, 100 metres. But what we did, we started from the south side of the beach. We led a 50 metre transect along the strand line, which is the high tide mark. And then we went 50 metres along. We measured the width of the area we were surveying as well, so this will back up our figures and data as well. What happened, we split the group into like 6 leaders with bags. They all collected a different type of rubbish each: plastic, netting, metal, other, and wood and glass, sorry. Yeah, netting and rock chemicals. So yeah, 6 people had 6 different bags, and then the first years were set up along the line, starting from the south side. They all walked in a straight line to the end, picking up every piece of litter that they saw. The piece of litter they would pick up, they would call out to the person who had that assigned bag. So if you pick up a piece of glass, you shout glass, and the glass bag comes over. At the end of this, we weighed all the individual bags to see if there was any comparison between the amounts of litter that were found on each beaches. So the amount of plastic, the amount of wood, the amount of metal, and so on. We used the unpaired t-test to compare the amount of litter that was found on Thomasport and Sandwell Beach. And Torsten here will now give you the data and the analysis of it.
Yep, as you can see, these are the results that we got. We collected 270.5 kilos at Sandwell Beach and 11.6 at Thomasport Beach. So you can see from that there's a bit of a difference already. We used the unpaired t-test because this compares data from two different locations that can correspond to each other. So weights from 2 different areas. Our critical value that we got from the unpaired t-test was 0.552. That was it to 3 decimal places. That might not mean a lot to you at the moment, but if you were to look at a critical value table, which is in the folder, which has been passed around somewhere, then you corresponded to that, the 95% significance level, and because it is lower than the critical value, we can reject our null hypothesis. So we can actually say statistically that there is a larger amount of litter found at Sandwell Beach compared to Thomasport. Even though the 2 beaches were actually of similar size, one was 120 metres long and one was 150, we did actually find a very large difference between the 2. There's lots of reasons for this. One could be that the Sandwell Beach has boats actually tied up onto it. This could collect debris that floats in from the harbour, which would then wash up onto the beach, onto the strand line, and then we collected it. Another reason might be that there's more people that live in Falmouth than there are on the Scillies, therefore there's more litter produced. So the more litter, it means that there's more potential runoff into the sea. into the harbour. Also, the last time the beaches were cleaned was something that we looked at. Thomas Porth was last cleaned in August 2012, so quite recently. When you compare that to Sandwell Beach, which was cleaned in at the very start of 2012, so there's about 8 months difference between the two. Also, on a final note, this could lead to for the Royal Cornish Yacht Club to look at their cleaning methods, maybe, because we're not actually sure what type of method they use. Whereas on the Isles of Scilly, they use the Marine Conservation Society method, the standardised method, which proved to be quite effective, as we only found a small amount of litter there. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I'll pass on to the costing side of the project survey.
I'll just give you the lowdown of the costings for the whole team, for the consultancy. So we broke it down, so each individual day has got, they've split it up into what they've got in total for the whole week. This was so if you wanted to just do one survey that we have done, you can the costings of that, or if you wanted it as a whole week, we've got the costings for that. So it broke out into equipment, the consultancy costs, which is if you want to employ us, we broke that down and added that up, so that's the whole summary for our consultancy.
Thank you. I'm doing the advantages on carrying out these surveys. The idea of us doing these surveys was for teaching future academic techniques and surveys, which we think would be very beneficial to quite a lot of people. Researching in different pelagic environments located around the estuary and the Isles of Scilly creates a diversity of environments and habitats, which is also beneficial. It gives the opportunity for us as a group to conduct and present a series of different pelagic experiments, which for us is a good technique for future jobs and other things. It shows us how to teach people how to act professionally, which is all in all very beneficial to us and to other people.
I would just like to say a massive thank you on behalf of all of us actually for attending, guys. Obviously you guys have got very busy jobs and you're taking time out from those jobs or after a long day. I would just like to say thank you, and education as well, taking time out for education. And you know, we really appreciate it, and any constructive questions we are happy to receive now, please. And what I'll probably do, I think because there's quite a few of us actually, it's probably best if we come up as groups and receive the questions and then walk on. Would that be cool? Okay, excellent. So
can we do it in the order of which it was presented?
Yeah, most definitely. Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Yeah, no
in
problem.
terms of the way we're going to
So,
do it.
boat
If that's all
survey
right.
group, yeah.
So can we, the boat survey group first?
Yeah, that's right. Thank you.
You'll have to excuse us, we didn't get time to read all of your paperwork initially, and it's rather difficult to do that whilst you're presenting. An idea beforehand, next time you do this, might be to hand that out prior to the presentation, so
Yeah, sorry, that was a mistake on
everybody's
our,
got an idea
on our half. Yeah.
of what's going on during the presentation. My first question is, what was your null hypothesis?
Our null hypothesis. We're basically we're looking at this. The null hypothesis was: is there any significant difference? There is no significant difference in the physical and chemical factors at 3 locations of the estuary, which may have impacts on primary production. So that's when we talk about temperature, the salinity, the turbidity, all things which would impact on primary production, and then we try to compare the 3 different areas of estuary and see if there would be different impacts on those primary producers in those areas.
One of the conclusions you reached was the fact that since you'd only conducted a very short survey, you couldn't disprove that or prove it.
Yeah.
Therefore, what would prove it? How long would you need to prove it? Whether it would be over a period of weeks, months, years?
That's fantastic. It's a really good question, actually. I mean, over a couple of seasons would be fantastic, because obviously with prime producers, if you look at the summer months and maybe the winter months, you've got different amounts of production in those areas. Obviously, some months being a lot more productive because you've got a lot of the light penetration and there's lots of nutrients around in the water columns, and the winter months being less productive a lot of the time. And so it would be important to do a comparison of the two extremes almost and get a basic idea about what's happening in those areas, and then we can make a comparison between the sites and comparison between the seasonality of the prime producers in those areas as well.
So it'd be useful for the college perhaps to record results on an ongoing basis.
Most
annually,
definitely, yeah.
And those results to be handed to each survey as it was done on an annual basis, so you could build on your results.
And I think the way we've put together the results tables and the pack that we've put together, it could be replicated.
Yeah.
Can I ask the gentlemen who were giving the results and things like that, James and Mike, there's a lot about results, but what actually is that, how is it going to benefit the people of Falmouth, the results that you've come up with now? In what way are they going to actually be transferred into economic and commercial?
Production is like central to the food web because it's at the base of the food chain. So your rate of primary production is going to affect all the other levels, like your fish stocks and all of that. So like having a good knowledge of how it's affected in the estuary, it's going to help limit like potential impacts that could harm primary production.
Yeah, understanding how productive the Fowl estuary is, or even the Fowl Bay area, can give us a good understanding of what fish species we should expect in the area and the abundance of the fish species, and that could then improve the money that's coming into the town produced from the fishing.
So the salinity and turbidity of the water tells us what about?
Plankton is very sensitive to any change in water quality, and keeping a constant monitor on water quality can then do that for the fishing. Because if the water quality goes really bad from the runoff and the area starts becoming a little bit more polluted, the plankton's going to go away. There's going to be no productivity at all, and the town could then really suffer from that.
Question?
Now you mentioned that the locations you chose were due to lack of time, like so you needed time to travel between all three. If you were given more time, do you have any locations in mind that you would choose?
We had a contingency plan if the weather was poor, but no, at the moment, because we were actually given a time constraint and asked to work within that. And also the idea was to look at survey techniques. So there was the initial idea of actually providing data which could be replicated, but also it was about training the first years on survey techniques. So within that timescale, we would have needed a whole day to take you out to more distant locations, which would have then impacted on us showing you how to do the analysis and also on the rest of the week really. So, but it is something that we would look at for the future. I think given the fact that we've chosen those 3 locations this year, if we're going to replicate it next year, we'd have to do the same 3 locations. Or the other alternative would be to do a separate survey later on in the year, which then again could be replicated.
Other things you might consider as well is if you're heading a lot further up the river towards Truro, for example. Truro is quite a large city, so sort of areas in and around there, you might get sort of different water quality kind of results from a sort of city area, from runoff and whatnot, from drainage and sewage. Okay.
It was mentioned that you had some equipment failures a couple of days beforehand.
Yes.
Do you have a contingency plan in place, seeing as that equipment then wasn't used? Was there not a backup facility you could have?
The CTD, which is the conductivity, temperature and density, that measures exactly the same things that we were actually looking at in the first place. So salinity and temperature. It just does it in a nicer way. It's in an instrument that takes a lot more. How do you say? Finer.
Yeah.
find a recording
The
measurement.
plan was to use the CTD alongside the current meter, which would give us a good idea about the currents that are working in the estuary as well, which could help us understand a bit more about the physical factors influencing prime production in the area. The CTD would have made it more possible to do longer surveying or further survey sites, because it actually does it a lot quicker than getting samples out of the water, taking the temperature, doing the salinity, doing the refractometer, because it does it all in one. And so initially, obviously, that was quite a major setback for us, I think, and it was just a few days before the experiment, the survey, and so we tried to think as quickly as we can on our feet. It might have made the survey a bit longer and mean we have to take time at more sites, however, but we still got the same results. They just hopefully would have been more accurate with the CTD, and hopefully for next time, fingers crossed, that could be implemented.
Do you feel that the students missed out by not having that equipment available?
I think so.
Yeah, I think, yeah.
Only because it's more of an industry standard equipment rather than using temperature and refractometer, because it kind of does everything in once and it compares them all together as well, so you know exactly where in the water column it is, you know its salinity, you know its temperature, and
to help you process the data and work through that whole processing stage, with the CTD it records every 2 seconds, I think it is, so it keeps taking constant, and so you get an extremely large amount of data that comes in, and to go through that and talk through processing that with you would have been an extremely hard thing for you to be able to understand how to process the data. So by actually keeping the data set a little bit smaller, it was a little bit easier for us to explain how to do the ANOVA test.
With my engaging the local community at home and teaching and learning, one, how did you find giving up your responsibility for delivering this to other members of the group? And two, do you think that possibly you were well equipped to actually give this information out to these new students as a group?
So I answer that, or do you guys want to talk about it?
Yeah, we're really well equipped actually. We had like laminated methods on board, so for the students to look at, and we assigned 1 second year to each piece of equipment, and we trained them prior to the boat, to going on the boat, so they knew their piece of equipment like inside out, instead of circulating around. So that, yeah, it worked really well.
Are you fully confident the results that were recorded were those as should have been?
Yeah, there was at some parts we had some faults with the equipment. With the Niskin bottle, for instance, it wouldn't catch straight away, so we couldn't collect water. So it was at one site we drifted a little bit, and then we had to take another GPS reading. So there are things that could have run a little bit smoother. But overall, it was a successful survey.
I think communication between the team and between us and the training team is important, because if we are effective and we've got good methods written down, we can hand that over and give that to somebody else with confidence and knowledge that they're going to be able to follow it through. So I think we did that to the best of our ability with the time available, and I think we were pretty confident with the people that were delivering the training, that they were able to, that they'd asked enough questions prior to the actual training day itself.
I think as well, also in terms of training, us training the second years, we trained the first years, actually helped us cement our understanding of the equipment, because usually teaching something actually makes it a lot easier for you to understand it, and it helps your knowledge base. So in that sense, that was really important, and it was really helpful as well for cementing everyone's knowledge of the equipment, and I think all beneficiaries benefited.
Excellent, thank you guys. Anybody else got a question?
The weather, yes. You mentioned that the weather wasn't too good when you went out and did the survey. So how did you arrive at the decision to go at that time, if in hindsight it affected the results?
On the day, the weather was fine. It was a really smooth boat trip. It's like a sea state of 0 to 1 while we were out there. It was really smooth. It was just, Claire mentioned there was a storm previously that day before, so that could have affected the results with the water.
We also chose as a collective to run the week in a specific way, so that it led on to the next survey. So the boat survey was looking at below the trophic levels, the chemical and physical factors that affect the primary production. And then the plankton is the primary production. So it had a story throughout the week, so it led on to the next survey, so it allowed the first years to follow along.
So what you're really trying to say is more surveys need commissioning in order to get more reliable results.
Most definitely. I think that's always the case with science.
Yes. Thanks, guys. Can we have the next group?
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Should we go turn the light on because it's really dark?
If you wish. Thank you. Questions. What was your null hypothesis?
We have two, actually. There's no significant difference in plankton abundance in climatic and non-climatic conditions, and that there's no change in water quality parameters between climatic and non-climatic conditions.
Okay. And I think, again, there was insufficient data because there was insufficient time to test it.
There was as well, and there was also a small time constraint. We only had 3 hours in which to conduct our survey, just due to the fact that there are quite a few groups and we did only have 5 days. But the amount of samples that we had, you could do as many as you needed. So the data that we could have collected was not endless, but vast. But due to time constraints, we could only look at so many.
Ideally, how long do you think the experiment should have run for?
Yeah, if we were to start it earlier, so one of our evaluation points was the fact that we collected the sample beforehand. I think it was 24 hours before the survey was actually undertaken on the plankton. So we put it into the culture tanks and then we put the heaters in. So maybe we needed to leave that for a longer length of time as well, because climate change doesn't happen overnight, as Lauren already discussed. It happens over a long period of time. So maybe we were to leave heat one of the tanks up for a longer period of time and then undertake the survey a week later, and then take samples every day afterwards.
I think ideally as well we should have conducted one before and tested how it was going to work in the time constraints that we had, but given we only had like a week before our survey was actually be conducted, we just didn't have the time or the equipment to actually go out
Would
and do
plankton levels in the area where you took the samples differ from the time of year?
Yes.
So would it also not be useful to conduct
Definitely.
several experiments throughout the year
Definitely.
on the same basis to compare your results?
Yeah, different seasons would be really good. With summer months would be completely different. So yeah, and yearly as well would be good, because then you'd get a different of if climate change is actually having an effect.
Okay, so again, you're saying the college should commission.
Yeah, we did also look at culturing different types of plankton, so phytoplankton. But once again, that was time constraints. We'd have to actually order that in, because we were looking at doing it from the samples that we collected, but due to the fact that there's zooplankton and phytoplankton in there, the zooplankton eat the phytoplankton. So if it's left in there for too long, you'll have no phytoplankton left. So what we wanted to do is bring some in, but due to time constraints, we couldn't get it in fast enough. But next year, we have made a list of what next year's groups should possibly have a look into, and maybe doing theirs a couple of weeks later, so they've got more time if they did want to do phytoplankton culturing. So that's what they could do.
Excellent. Thanks.
What would you change if you could? Anything about the way you conducted it or how it was run?
Like Brian just said, like getting a specific species of plankton would be helpful. Like we didn't focus on a specific species; it was just primary production as a whole, which in hindsight wasn't the best idea. Like she already mentioned that they carnivorous and eat each other wasn't that helpful.
And due to seasons as well. So at the moment we're coming into the winter season, so there's less phytoplankton and therefore less zooplankton due to trophic levels. So maybe if we conducted it in the summer, the first year we would have seen a lot as well, because the data that we were there was in the slides, there was quite a large amount of sample. They were then taking a slide, so it was a small amount of sample compared to the large sample that was in there. So then they were finding the grid coordinate, so it was getting smaller and smaller and smaller each time, and less likely for them to see anything. So next time we'd probably conduct it in the summer, so that there was more chance of them seeing things as well.
Basically, at one stage through the slides, Lauren, I think you said that you raised the temperature to 20. 20 what?
Degrees.
20 degrees. That's fair enough.
And why 20?
Yeah, why, is
Yeah.
there a specific reason for the 20?
Yeah, the average temperature of seawater is between 16 and 17 degrees, and with climate change increasing, they estimate that sea temperatures are going to change between 2 or 3 degrees. So increasing it to them seemed quite logical to us, because that's what they're estimating it. But obviously it's over a long period of time, and what we did was over 12 hours, so we could have destroyed everything in the tank over those 12 hours and you wouldn't have seen anything anyway. So ideally we should have done it, like increase the temperature gradually.
How effective was your training of the first years?
So on our training group, so the second years that presented it, it was good because we actually ironed out a lot of problems. So the nitrate and the phosphate testing kits were quite complicated, and because we'd spent 2 weeks prior actually writing the methods and going over the methods, we were quite clued in as to how they worked, whereas having a couple of hours to teach that to five second year students who'd never seen the test before was quite complicated. Also what we found out as well is that we were going to get every single group, so there were 4 groups of first years, we were going to get them all to do water quality testing, and each test takes 9 or 6 minutes. So the phosphate one takes 6 minutes and the nitrate one takes 9. So if you get all of them to do it, because we were only doing it for 3 hours, it actually ran over the time. So we changed it. So by training them, we were actually helping to change our methodology as well. So it was really useful. And hopefully they learned how to use the testing kits as well. But we made sure that we had big prints of them on the wall as well, just to make sure that we could follow them. So there was no mistakes.
You're confident there was no mistakes?
Yeah.
Good. Anything else? Thank you, guys.
No problem. Thank you very much.
On to the next group. I'm going to ask the same question again. Do you remember what that was?
The null hypothesis.
Yeah.
Well, we're looking at macro and parasites, so we said, okay, the null hypothesis is just going to be, it's going to be the same number of parasites on the south coast as there are on the north coast. So that was what we were trying to disprove, that there was no difference.
I think you're probably the only group that stated that. Well done.
Nematodes, what are they?
Nematodes are little roundworms. They're a very basic form of life form, which they don't, in small numbers, they don't actually harm the organism which they live inside. In large numbers, they have been known to decrease the health and, in some cases, cause death of their hosts.
Your sample size was minute.
It was, unfortunately.
How long should you run this over? How many samples would you need in order?
As an absolute minimum, we think 10, which is what we were initially
You mentioned
planning
that
for.
in your presentation.
Yeah, but I think as many as possible to give a greater depth for analysis.
So another group saying you want us to commission more surveys over the next year.
We'd love to have the opportunity to carry out the survey.
I think with science you just need infinity resources and infinity time, because obviously the more
You can
data
always
you
do more
collect,
research.
yeah.
But again, the college could build on results collected by groups over months and years.
Certainly, yeah.
Well, now that we've ironed out all of the issues with our methodology, and in actual fact there were no issues with the procedure of the survey, it was simply the size of our sample.
So the first years are now going to be able to train next year's first
In
year.
essence, you could simply reuse all of the materials that we've made.
Have twice as much data as well.
Have twice as much data and a greatly reduced time cost and monetary cost.
I think as well another thing is actually getting hold of the fish, because we didn't want to give our first years the same experience we had, which was fish that had been frozen, defrosted, and then left out in the sun for half an hour. So, I mean,
you're after a fishing trip as well,
which is great. So we went out and got some fresh fish like on the day, and so
excellent
as well that helped.
During your presentation, you had quite a lot of really nice presented media and websites. Do you feel that information was clearly presented to the first years?
Yes, well, it did go up on Moodle, and Colin's word for that. I suppose, we should have liaised with you a bit better and come into your lectures and actually said, look, here it is on here. But instead, I think a lot of groups, we got, unfortunately, where last year we said we'd do the same that our second years said that they would do, like we'd be like, oh, okay, so we've learnt, so we'll give you it all in advance. But when you actually do it, you end up having less and less time. And I mean, we did try. It was all on the J drive, and
I think we were so stressed out about teaching our training group as well that we kind of pushed aside the first years because we were
Did
so
the-
pressured about everything that we
Did
didn't
your
forget
training group see that website and see the video?
yeah, they had
prior to
the
showing
video in
us?
advance.
Yeah.
What we did to improve communications is we actually set up social networking. It rules the world nowadays, but we set up a Facebook group so that we could basically upload all of our data, all of our information, every piece of material that we were going to use to give you, we gave them so that they could read it up for about just over a week. I think they had access to it.
So I mean, in future, we could maybe add the first years in to all of these groups, and then you can see as it progresses. So like, because we had each document and we advised everyone to read through it just to make sure that they understood what it was about. So I mean, if we added you in as well.
We also ran a training session for the training group where we actually got some mackerel in, and that is what we recorded for the. Sorry, no, my mistake. We didn't record it.
We actually did 2 practice dissections.
Yeah, we did. We did a couple of practice ones. So the training group and us, our group, we were all on the same page as far as the actual experiment was going to go.
Who's doing the physical dissection and creating the slides to analyse for parasites?
Well, first of all, we started off with Craig, who is the aquaculture teacher. So we got him to run us through it. He couldn't physically help us dissect because he has a problem with his hand right now. But he did a step-by-step guide with us. He stayed in the lab with us. He taught us exactly what to do, and we videoed that as well as our training.
Okay.
So we used that as training to train our trainees, and then our video from training our trainees was used to train the first years. So we did a lot of dissections ourselves, and we had professional help with that.
Our main aim though was to allow the first years to undergo the dissection themselves, to learn all of the techniques and exactly what's what. So our training group were there to support the first years in undertaking the dissection.
Do you feel like you achieved that?
I do feel that we achieved that.
Who prepared the slides? Because obviously you'd have to examine microscopic organisms, did you?
Actually, nematodes aren't not microscopic organisms.
Cool.
They measure between
About a centimetre long.
about a centimetre on average. So you can see
We did manage to find a live one in well, the first year's found a live one.
Nice.
That's how fresh the fish were. It's really
group that
gory.
found the
But
fish
no, you
that
can
had
visually
200.
see them.
Sorry.
And
Yeah,
this
there's
was
one
mackerel,
fish that had
wasn't it?
200 different nematodes in. So
One of the fish that you can eat raw.
Yeah, it's yeah.
Do you want some?
Yeah, we froze.
I had some last week.
Going back to, as I asked another group, your ownership of the training, because if you were training volunteers, you would have to possibly train somebody to go and train these volunteers. How did you feel about actually giving up that role? Did you feel that you were confident enough to actually be able to teach these members, the members that you sent out there? Did you feel that you taught them well enough and that they were actually prepared?
Yeah, I think we definitely did.
It was certainly a daunting task, but we luckily we're friends, with the people we were training, so we were able to, to train them successfully and meet with them numerous times to ensure that they had our message firmly,
they were
programmed.
responsive to our video and to the training sessions that we put on. They asked lots of questions, and in doing that we managed to come up with a frequently asked questions list that we put in the manual for the first year. So by the time they got to the point of teaching the first years, we felt they were as clued up as we were.
I thought they almost knew more than us.
I mean, it was hard. We all wanted to get in there and dissect them ourselves.
Yeah, because something I can't stand is actually giving away something. That's why I asked the question. It's almost like it's my thing, and I don't want to just give it away. And it's the hardest.
It was hard. Yeah.
It is the hardest thing to do.
It was a very
It's hard to stay quiet as well.
Sort of
So would you
pivotal.
employ any of the first years that you trained?
Certainly, yeah, I think they all did
I
pretty
think
well.
every single one of them were enthusiastic. They all wanted to learn, and they all got very hands-on. And a few of them were particularly good. But as far as, do you want me to distinguish a few people?
No.
I mean, as well, I don't think any of them said, absolutely not, I'm not going to do this sort of thing. Like, they all definitely said, we'll give this a go, and then they all actually did rather
Very
well.
much.
Positive about the experience.
Yeah.
So can I ask you, uploaded the details on Facebook. Did you say the results? You uploaded the results on
We
Facebook?
uploaded the results, and if you look in our folder, the URL is actually there if you want to have a look at the Facebook group.
So how about, because I represent employers, there would be employers that sell fish, and as you pointed out, you can eat them raw. So this is this particular fish. So I would think that they would be quite concerned to see that sort of data that might affect their business. So if they sell fresh fish, for example, Newquay, that's on the north coast, isn't it? I'm not sure I want to buy any from them, so
It's
just at the moment, not till I check them.
It's more the location of the nematodes. They're present more in the digestive tract and in the organs. So you don't tend, if you're eating flesh, you tend to notice them too. It might be a bit off-putting knowing.
Yeah, it's very reassuring.
There
Why did
are
I
a
ask
few-
that question?
There are a few things to consider when you come to that, really. Two groups, DEFRA, for example, which is the Department of something food and agriculture, I'm so sorry. A lot of people are doing research into this so that we can assess the actual physical health of the stocks of fish which people are buying, and a lot of research has been done into it, and there's been very little to say that there's actually any harm which can come from consuming a fish which has parasites. Because as I say, the area where the parasites live, because there's so much blood flow going through the digestive tracts, those parts are removed before you actually eat the fish.
Sorry, if you had a question. Thanks. What's more is that if you carry out research like this, you could say that the north, a lot of parasites, in the south the fish tend to be cleaner. Then you could perhaps say, give the fish in the north a break, stop catching them, partly because they're weakened because of parasites, and secondly because you don't want to eat a fish that's got a lot of parasites. And you could then rearrange how fish are being caught and where from to capitalise on the healthy fish, and also allow the unhealthy fish a chance to, regroup and sort of regenerate, which is why it's important research.
Quick question. How do you rate teaching somebody as a method of learning?
Very highly.
Yeah.
Was it good?
Points out the holes in your knowledge.
It solidifies your own knowledge as well, particularly with the statistics that we've all been doing, because we haven't been having to teach it, we're having to understand it.
Before you can teach
yeah,
it.
Exactly.
You really have to have it drilled in before you can confidently tell someone else about it.
Yeah, I really think learning is one of the best ways of teaching.
The other way around. Excellent, well done, thank you guys. Unless anybody else has got another question?
Training, obviously you were talking about having to increase this survey to 10. What were your costings per fish to do that?
Approximately
£4.50 per kilogram, so it wasn't per fish, it's per kilogram, it's just the way that the fishmongers work.
We were able to calculate, I did a little bit of a calculation for our costings. We're able to calculate that the price per fish is approximately 80 pence.
What happens if you actually then add in time and labour? How much is it per fish?
We, as a consultancy, we calculated that we were on £15 an hour, basing on a 6-hour day, which comes to £90 a day per consultant that you hire. But however, the costings, if we were to redo this survey, the costings would be greatly reduced, as we wouldn't need to pay for another planning week or another training week, because we've already done the planning, we've already done the training. So it would simply be a 4-hour session, hiring out aloud.
It was just the fact of it, you've got a price for a fish, but I just thought as in with the putting all the man hours in per fish, that was always, because if you're going to increase if you're going to increase it from 8 to 20, it would then be
But by far the most costly element of it was the training, the time that we took to develop the training materials and the actual training. And obviously a lot of the materials are produced now, so if we were going to do it again, a lot of that time we wouldn't need, so we could definitely reduce the costs just due to having the materials already.
Great.
We also wouldn't need to print all our booklets up again. So.
Okay, thank you very much, guys.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Cheers.
We've got 10 minutes left in 2 blocks.
Okay, thank you. Guess what the first question is.
What was your hypothesis? Our null hypothesis, it's not on the board, was that there was no significant difference between the population and species diversity of the megavertebrates between Penzance and the Isles of Scilly on the port side and on the starboard side.
What made you choose that hypothesis?
Well, they're pelagic species, so you're more likely to see them out at sea than closer to the coast, so we just wanted to test that out.
Okay. Reasonable assumption.
With that in mind, you do realise the port and starboard
Yeah,
chair.
changes.
Was you expecting the results to be pretty equal?
Yeah. We should have changed it, so we did 2 statistical tests. So on the way out, you did the port and starboard, and then you did another statistical test on the way back ones on the port and starboard.
Yeah.
Because then you'd have got the right things instead of bulking them together. Then it was like equalled out.
Would weather have affected your
A
survey?
lot. Oh yeah.
Would time have affected your survey? And
We
the number of times at which you did it?
yeah. We should the weather affected it most because with cetaceans and things popping out of the water, with the being a high sea state, the waves block them coming up, so you don't spot them popping up out of the water, so then you don't record that, so then you're getting less recordings. So the time at which you do it is important, because if you stay longer there, you might train your eye to it better. We gave a 5-minute leeway for them to get their eyes in to understand what they're looking for, but it wasn't long enough because they just got into it and then they'd have to move on.
We found a bit of a problem. I know from surveying things myself. The more time you spend out at sea and the sea state's higher, when you see white horses, you can mistake them for a splash, which can affect your results as well.
Also, even if it was fairly good weather and you saw, say, a common dolphin, you don't actually know how many more common dolphins are underneath. So it's hard to actually get a judgment of, actually there may be 100 more under the water, but only 5 at a time are jumping out of the water. So it's really, really difficult to take judgment on it.
Anybody else?
You said that you had a little problem with students, what's the word there, not being able to actually
Concentrate.
well, one was concentrate and not actually know what they were looking for, so second years, some of the second years took over. How would you change things for that then?
We did have a plan in place. They all had ID guides, so they could match what they saw out there. It was that the second years stepped in a bit too soon, so we should have been there and said just hold on a minute, let them just in case, and then back it up. So say they saw a common gull and it was actually a different type of gull, like a black-headed gull, they could have been actually it's this type of gull, just let them have a little bit more time, because it was the first time that they was doing this type of thing, so should just hold on a bit back while jumping in.
Sorry. Also, with Orca, if you obviously in the groups there was one observer for the cetaceans, one for the birds, and one for the recorder. If someone else, say you were spotting birds, if someone else spotted a bird and said there is a whatever it was, that would actually count as a mistaken sighting. It wouldn't actually count because the observer didn't see it. So that was, we needed to step in obviously so that it would actually be liable, so that we could actually send it off to Walker.
How did you decide to take care of the first years on a float? Was that from previous experience?
Yeah, we found out last year we got a little drained on this, especially on the way back. We was all like, oh, we've got to do another survey, so we just tried to keep them motivated by everyone likes food, everyone likes warm drinks, staying warm. So that's what we thought, was just doing a few biscuits here and there and crisp, a few hot drinks, and it'll keep them happy, so they want to do some more work.
Did you find it warm anyway?
Yeah. Until it started raining, and then everyone's.
We'll go back to my favourite question again. So how did you feel about giving up that training role to somebody else?
It was hard, very hard, because we knew how it should have gone and how we'd have done things differently, and the second years
didn't do what we had in our head, if you know what I mean. So say we had a training day in here, and it was supposed to be knowledge review for the first years, and we found that some of them was like, you need to look at that one again, type thing. Even though they was letting the second years do it, we wanted the first years to step back a little bit so that it was the first year's knowledge, and it was hard for us to not jump in. So there was some things that we would have was a bit harder than others.
It was also really difficult. Me and Steph went on the Orca training, so we knew exactly how Orca standards wanted it, and it's really difficult to stand there and like watch someone do it slightly wrong, and we couldn't really say much unless they were doing it completely wrong. That was when we were able to step in. That was really difficult, knowing exactly what they wanted and not being able to say, actually, just change that slightly, but we couldn't even do that. So.
Okay. Thank you, guys.
Thank you
We're
very
running
much.
short of
Thank you.
time, aren't we?
Our null hypothesis was there would be no significant difference in the weight of marine litter collected from both beaches, respectively, and it's important to have these results for two reasons primarily: A, to understand where it's coming from better, and B, just to evaluate how that community is doing addressing the matter.
And you managed to prove yours
Yes.
wrong.
Yes, we did.
Yeah, we found that there was a considerable amount more in Falmouth than everyone else.
Would that be affected by the fact that you were doing it on an island?
Yes. Yeah,
That's also in the folder. That was something I forgot to mention. We spoke about tidal currents and things like that. But
so then they have the full brunt of the Atlantic swell, so there's going to be a lot of flush in the area. So when there's particular high tides, it's going to carry out a lot of litter, and then it will go into the Carmen Channel.
Yeah.
Also, the fact that the MCS actually work at Thomas Porth Beach, cleaning the beach, obviously skewed our data slightly. I mean, if both beaches ideally weren't cleaned, we would have got a much accurate range of results than what we actually did.
Thanks.
How did you distinguish what was rubbish? It's been in the news quite recently that there's been a clean-up of seaweed.
yeah, it's mentioned in the introduction in the folder once again. The fact that we would leave all the marine, the vegetation that was on the beach, due to the fact that that would actually take away the carbon from the environment that's on the beach that would degrade. So the species there wouldn't be able to get the nutrients from it.
Basically, anything man-made.
As well, so I mean, to remove stuff like that would be stupid. It wouldn't be part of what we were trying to do.
We've got a question on training.
Various other groups have got their data available to view online. Have you got a link to any of your data or results?
We haven't got that online at the moment, no.
Why did you choose the beaches that you chose?
Mainly there was three reasons. The sizes of the beaches that we chose were the same, roughly. They were both in areas that had harbours, working ports, and both the areas were protected on the south side by a natural barrier. So
We also wanted to pick a beach that wasn't cleaned by city council, such as Gilling Bays, which is
not Gilling Bays, Sandwell.
No.
Such as Gilling Bays.
Cleaned by the
council.
you were saying that was the beach we chose.
No.
Okay.
Did you this thing about the clean beach? Did you discover that after you worked out which beaches you chose? Did you choose the beaches?
Yeah, because we corresponded with the woman who works for the MCS in the Azur about 2 weeks before we actually went there. So we found out then that it was too late to change it because it was the only beach around some areas that was the same size as Sandwell Beach that we did. And we'd already done practice runs on Sandwell Beach.
I see.
So to change it would have had to change our whole experiment.
Did you think about changing this end?
No, like I said, we'd already
cleaned
done practice runs on Sandwell Beach, so already knew we would have a
It was
contingency
already
plan.
partially cleaned.
I was going to say, would that not skew your data?
We didn't actually collect any
We
litter.
went through testing methodology and stuff, so we didn't skew like the MCS did. We didn't skew the data slightly.
Be a bit shocking if we'd cleaned it the week before.
Yeah.
We just took the training groups down there, showed them what to do, showed them any potential hazards, stuff like that, and made sure they knew perfectly what was going on.
Okay, cool.
Yeah,
thanks.
again, on that on the front, the training of the groups. Did you feel that was that went well, or was, again you felt that you couldn't actually relinquish that kind of?
I think it went quite well. I thought I was gonna, because Warren, I and Ben had been in Thailand and been doing it. We'd done it so many times before that I thought I'd go and have a look and see if they'd missed any bits, because you have to, even the tiniest little bits, you have to pick it up. And I thought I'd be walking around the back being like, oh, I have to pick up that, but they got everything. I was really impressed.
Also, it's great for us because then we can actually have to do the little things.
Cool, thanks. Can we have you all together for some general questions and finance questions, just a couple. Just to say thank you for a very, very good presentation as well. I really enjoyed it. I don't know about these guys. Really, really good. It looks like you've done a lot of financial computations. Would you be able to submit costings to show how much it would cost the college to do that over the course of a year, every year, to show whether or not the college could afford to repeat the experiment every single year and get ongoing statistics? Could you do that from the figures you've got already?
Labour? Yeah, definitely. Because obviously, if we're charging ourselves, charging ourselves the money with voluntary labour. So if we got students from the first years or second years to do the surveys via our methodologies, using the equipment we've got here, costings would be very small.
If we weren't as a consultancy, the costings of doing this Pelagic week, so if it was all voluntary and we're taking it as now second years teaching the first years, it would cost the college very little because they already have all of the equipment. No other equipment was purchased. We use Luke's knowledge and Craig's knowledge, so people who were already here, we didn't. Some people sourced outsiders information, outsiders and professional information, and that was all done. That was all given for free as well. So if we were to repeat it next year, it would be a very little cost, as well as it's mainly the printing that costs so much. Because we all like pretty booklets and it's all in colour. So.
The only other thing that cost was the Salonian. Obviously, we all had to.
That's an annual trip, though, isn't it?
And the work's taken, we have to pay for it, so the college doesn't have to pay anything.
Yeah,
we're paying.
it was all.
That's good. Excellent. Questions, anyone?
If we've got the time, guys, I know we're at 5 o'clock. Do you think we could nip along the table and give one thing that we thought was really good and one thing we think they could maybe improve? Start with Colin.
My simple one is, as everybody knows, ICT. It's the way forward. The one group used QR codes, came in and asked a few questions and come up with some nice stuff, which was commented by the panel. I think stuff is a lot more going forward. As mentioned before, it's there, it's in your face, it's instantaneous.
And something that was good, Cole?
Sorry?
Something that was good?
That was what it was good.
Was that good and everything
It was
else
good
was
and it could have been better from everybody else's point of view. So
Thank you.
Something that's bad. Abbreviations. And assuming that everybody in front of you knows exactly what you're talking about, because I don't, I'm thick. So when you use an abbreviation that's a technical term for something you're talking about, if you use the abbreviation, remember to fill it out after you've said it. But one really, really good thing that you all started to do was you started to realise that we were technical nobodies. And throughout the course of the rest of your conversation, when you're illustrating the slides, you start to explain the reasoning behind what it is that you do. And I think if you've got an audience in front of you, you've got to assume that their level of intelligence or their level of knowledge about the thing that you're talking about might be slightly lower than yours. You've been commissioned to do something. The reason you've been commissioned to do it is because you know more than they do. So make it simpler for them to understand, but you did that really well. Just don't use abbreviations about equipment that you've used or technical bodies that you've used for research. But the way you explained what you did was really, really good.
I can't really think of anything bad, so not that would be worth mentioning. So I think what I thought was great was several groups really promoted the next step about more research required, promoting the work that needed to be done. So there were several groups that I thought, yes, if I was commissioning this, then I would want to take that further and do more. So I felt some of you sold more than the others, just from that perspective. So if you're presenting it, always remember that you're going for the next bit of business, the next job.
Good. Really enjoyed all the presentations from you guys. It's given, I know me, sure Sophie as well, some really good ideas for next year. Bad point, the only thing I could say as a student point of view, going back on what Colin said, use of more ICT and communication during the week would have been good, but that's coming from somebody who's come from outside.
I'd probably say you're came across really confident and you answered the questions really well. And I'd probably say the only bad point would be just having the files a bit earlier so that we could actually look through them.